You are listening to Two Pretty Good Bad Men, an Alias Smith and Jones podcast. Before we get started on today's episode, I want to tell you all that I have failed yet again on the Maverick front. Okay? I did. Exit from Wickenburg, our last episode, was a reworking of the Maverick episode, 2 Tickets to 10 Strike. I really need to remember to check these things before I record. I will strive to do better. Sorry. Anywho, today we will be covering episode 4, Wrong Train to Brimstone. This episode was shot in late December and early January of 1970 and 1971, and it aired on February 4th, 1971. This is a rare episode not to give a writing credit to Roy Huggins. This has the story and teleplay by a man named Stephen Candle, and it was directed by Jeffrey Hayden. Side note, I always want to call this episode Wrong Train to Briscoe, because there's a character named Harry Briscoe, and Briscoe, Brimstone, no, just me, okay. I don't know how Stephen Candle, or Candle, it might be Candle, managed to get this story wholesale onto the show without it being handed to him by Huggins and then reworked by Huggins, but good for him. And this is his only ASJ episode. Like all of our writers so far, Candle had a long career in writing for television. He's responsible for both of the Harry Mudd episodes of Star Trek, and that alone is a pretty awesome legacy. But he wasn't content to just stop there. He created the Western series Iron Horse. He also wrote 4 episodes of Pete Doole's previous series Gidget, starring Sally Field, and he went on to become a writer, producer, and story editor on MacGyver. That's the original MacGyver, not the reboot. Our director, Jeffrey Hayden, was a longtime television director who was notably married to Eva Marie Saint from 1951 until his death in 2016. That's pretty cool. His directing credits include 28 episodes of The Donna Reed Show, 9 episodes of 77 Sunset Strip, 8 episodes of The Andy Griffith Show, and 39 episodes of Peyton Place. He also did a grand total of 8 episodes for Alias Smith and Jones, so we will be seeing his name pop up again. He even directed the last episode of the series. Sure, they didn't know it was going to be the last episode at the time, but, it's something. Post-Alias Smith and Jones, he went on to do 5 episodes of The Incredible Hulk, 4 episodes of another Glenn A. Larson show, Quincy, and 5 episodes of Knight Rider. Hayden co-wrote and directed the documentary Primary Colors, the story of Corita. This is about a woman named Corita Kent, who was a nun turned artist, and it was narrated by Hayden's wife, Eva Marie Saint. I haven't seen it, but it seems like it must have been some sort of passion project. His last IMDb credit is another documentary called Children in America's Schools with Bill Moyers, and it looks like it was produced by him and his wife, and it also looks like the only thing that they ever produced as a company, I guess. Moving on to our guest stars, we have J.D. Cannon as Harry Briscoe. Harry Briscoe will become one of the most important recurring characters on the show, and the only one with any sort of an arc, even if it's an arc that kind of bounces back where it started. At the time, J.D. Cannon was a regular on the show McCloud, and he apparently was not super into it, even though he was nominated for an Emmy for the role. He said he loved playing Harry Briscoe, though. It was a fun role for him, and he looked forward to getting on the set. That's very cute. His career started in the late 50s, and he was mostly a television actor, but he did have some movie roles like Cool Hand Luke. He passed away in 2005 at age 83. Next, we have Beth Brickell as Sarah Blaine. She actually doesn't have the longest list of credits on IMDb, but she was the wife on Gentlemen, for whatever that's worth. Also, she was in Death Game, which might better be known to you from the Eli Roth remake Knock Knock with Keanu Reeves and Ana de Armas. Sadly, she doesn't get to play one of the crazy chicks. That deep honor went to Sandra Locke and Colleen Camp. Instead, Brickell played the wife, and if the remake is anything to go by, it must have been a small part. Then we have William Wyndham as Jeremiah Daly. This guy had a hugely long acting career. He was in To Kill a Mockingbird, The Americanization of Emily, Escape from Planet of the Apes, and one of my favorite Wyatt Earp movies, Hour of the Gun. From 1963 to 1966, he starred in a series called The Farmer's Daughter. He played Commodore Decker in the episode Doomsday Machine in Star Trek, and look, Star Trek is a big deal to me, okay? I'm gonna mention it as it comes up. He was also in an episode of Gentle Ben, so I guess this was a reunion with Beth Brickell. He was in the pilot of the A-Team, which I know only I on this entire planet care about, but that's fine. And he kept working all the way into the 21st century with guest roles on Ally McBeal, Jag, and Providence. And I guess all this is why he gets the special guest star credit. There's also a couple of bit parts that I want to shout out. The horse trader at the beginning, Macduff, is played by J. Pat O'Malley, who did a lot of voice work for some classic Disney movies. He was the Elephant Colonel in The Jungle Book. He did multiple voices in 101 Dalmatians. Importantly, Jasper, one of Cruella's henchmen, and the Colonel, one of the dogs on the Twilight bark. And he did practically every single voice in the entire Walrus and Carpenter section of Alice in Wonderland. I grew up on these movies, so this makes me very happy. And the part of the telegrapher, who doesn't even get a name, is played by William Christopher, who would go on to play Father Mulcahy on MASH. He's one of only 4, I think, characters who was on the show from the first season to the last. Let me see. Hawkeye, Margaret, Mulcahy, and Klinger. Yeah, that's it. Those were the only ones. According to IMDb, this episode was put together with the reformation of Harry Briscoe, a later episode, to create a feature-length TV movie that went under the name Alias Smith and Jones, The Gun and the Nun. And the only new footage is Harry Briscoe acting as a narrator, as if he's telling the story to his future child. And it is on IMDb, so take with a grain of salt, but I think this is true. I couldn't find much on Google, but I found enough to make me believe that this probably was a thing. Plus, I know other older shows have done that with some regularity with their episodes. That's our facts. Let's get into the episode. So right off, let's give this episode a hand for not having a sneak peek. Come on, cheer! And enjoy it. It will not happen often. They've just sold their horses for $80 so they can get a stake in a poker game, when the kid spots a Deputy Wade Sawyer and ducks them both out of his line of sight. He takes the initiative for both of them and tells Hayes that they're getting out of town as fast as possible. I like that Kid takes the lead there. Their first plan is simply to buy their horses back from the trader Macduff, which seems reasonable. After all, they just sold them to him like a minute ago. Unfortunately, Macduff is only willing to sell them back for $100, which they don't have. They only have the $80 that he gave them for those same horses. And this man will not budge. He's a jerk. Plan B is to catch a stagecoach. Sadly, the stage is already gone. God, traveling back then was so inconvenient, wasn't it? Especially with stages being robbed left, right, and center. According to TV, anyway. Plan C is to get on the train heading east later that night. However, once they get to the train station, they find that the whole train is sold out and the next one isn't until Tuesday. Now, I'm not sure what day it's supposed to be in this scene, but since he doesn't say tomorrow, we could assume it's at least 2 days away. Again, traveling back then must have sucked. And I should know. I died of cholera like 12 times playing the Oregon Trail in grade school. They even try to bribe the guy at the train station, but he won't budge either. My thought was that why don't they just camp a few miles away from town until the next train comes, and they could probably make it out without the deputy spotting them. But if they did that, I guess we wouldn't have an episode. They overhear 2 men named Grant and Gaines picking up tickets for the train. They follow them into the washroom and offer to buy their tickets off of them. The 2 men refuse and are actually pretty hostile towards them. One of them pulls a gun on the kid, and Hayes reacts by immediately trying to just forget the whole situation. When that doesn't work, they jump both Grant and Gaines and tie them up and steal their tickets. Now, that is most definitely against the law. It's kind of fun catching all the laws they break in a series that's all about them trying to not break laws. They use the Grant and Gaines identity to climb aboard the train. And it's kind of like that scene in Titanic when Jack and his friend Fabrizio try to board the ship with the tickets that they just won in a poker game. You know what I mean? Like, they're so happy to be boarding the ship/train, but you know something bad is going to happen if they get on that boat/train. So you're like, no, don't get on that ship/train. You're going to freeze to death and stuff. Anyway, they take a couple of seats in a crowded car and take in their surroundings. Once the train gets moving, all of the women on board start taking off their wigs and shawls to reveal that they're actually men. Every one of the women is a man in drag except for one. This raises their eyebrows, which is understandable. Before they can do much more, Harry Briscoe enters the scene to explain the plot for us. This train has been loaded with $250,000 for the purpose of luring the Devil's Hole gang and catching Hayes and Curry. Everyone on that train is a member of the Bannerman Detective Agency, which is this show's version of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, and I am unsure why they couldn't just use the Pinkerton name, because it's not like Huggins wouldn't pull from real history for his westerns all the time. You want to see Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday meet Kid Curry and Hannibal Hayes? Just wait. You will. The train is also loaded with booze so that all the agents can celebrate after they capture Hayes and Curry. This will be important later. Despite having no pictures of Hayes and Curry, Harry is sure that they're going to catch them because the one woman on board, Sarah Blaine, has spent time with them and can identify them on sight. Hayes and the kid have never seen this woman before in their lives, leaving them to wonder just what the hell she's up to. She was brought into this operation by another Bannerman agent, Jeremiah Daly. Daly has been eyeing the boys suspiciously since they came aboard. Sarah goes up to them and introduces herself, presumably because they're the only hot guys on the train. They tell them their name are Grants and Gaines. Alias is on top of alias. What a tangled web we weave, etc., etc. She explains that she knows Hayes and Curry because she was injured in a train robbery the two of them committed, and they took her back to their hideout so she could recuperate. When she was better, they let her go and gave her some money for her troubles. They were such gentlemen to her, so she kept her mouth shut. But once she met Agent Daly, he convinced her that actually she should set them up to be killed instead. Daly pulls her aside and tells her that they are not Grant and Gaines, and her reaction is hilarious. She goes, "What? But they said they were," in the most hurt voice possible, as if every word she didn't just say to them wasn't a lie. Hayes can't keep who is Grant and who is Gaines straight. Too many aliases. Anyone would get tripped up. Daly just straight up confronts them about knowing they aren't who they claim to be. They tell them the truth, that they were in a hurry to get out of town and their only option was to take Grant's and Gaines' tickets. Daly believes them. Then Hayes further tells him the truth, that they're Hannibal Hayes and Kid Curry. Daly just laughs that off and says, "Fine, keep your secret," and he's willing to let it be for now. And then Daly says, "If I'm any judge of human nature, these two will do just fine when I tell them what's in it for them." Well, my dude, I guess you're a crappy judge of human nature. They're coming up on Brimstone, and the kid wants to just bail, but Hayes doesn't want to risk the whole Bannerman agency tracking them. His mind works fast, though. He figures that Grant and Gaines must have been freed by now and sent a telegram ahead to warn Harry about them. So they get off the train to intercept it. And this is William Christopher's one scene. His voice seems lower by just a tad here. And Hayes was right. There is, in fact, a telegram waiting for them, and they assure the ancestor of Father Mulcahy that they'll relay the message to Harry. With that out of the way, they reboard the train, and it's their turn to guard the gold. And like it's second nature, Hayes cracks open the chest, and they drool over it for a minute. But they put it away. Not like they can exactly escape with it now, even if they were inclined to do so. They figure that with Wheat now in charge of the Devil's Hole gang, he will absolutely try and lead the gang to rob the train. The kid starts to get worried about them and wants to warn them. Hayes is not about that life. He is much more concerned with their amnesty. Again, we see that the kid is more of, not a bleeding heart, but more likely to be led by his emotions, and Hayes is much more pragmatic. For the most part in this show, Hayes is concerned with himself and the kid has to remind him from time to time that other people matter too. The kid says that no one in that gang has ever killed anyone and they don't deserve to die. Hayes acknowledges this, but doesn't know how to help them without jeopardizing themselves. The kid is fine with just getting off the train and getting to Wheat and the rest before they get to the train. When Hayes reminds him that that'll be the end of their amnesty, the kid seems okay with it. He'd rather save their friends' lives. Well, maybe they're their friends. The last time we saw them, they didn't exactly part on great terms. Hayes says he needs to think about it. That's kind of cold. If not for the kid being there to plead their case, Hayes might very well have just let them get massacred. The discussion is probably the best scene in the episode. They're really fleshing out the boys more and more and figuring out how they differ from each other as people. Harry brings the boys rifles, and J.D. Cannon is so clearly having the time of his life with this character. I'll be honest, it took me quite a while to warm up to Harry, but now that I have, looking back, I can appreciate these earlier episodes with him a bit more. They make a stop, and Hayes has a plan to save the gang and themselves. They steal some horses, which is a hanging offense. Good God, boys, you suck at being law-abiding citizens. And they rush to find the gang. And the Devil's Hole gang is indeed planning to rob this train. I do have a bone to pick, and that's that none of these guys are any of the same people we saw in the pilot. I guess the guy calling the shots is meant to be Wheat, but Earl Holliman wouldn't come back unless he had something substantial to do, so he's played by stuntman Hal Needham here. I'm surprised they couldn't even get Dennis Fimple to come in as Kyle. He guest starred in more episodes than anyone else. It must have been a scheduling conflict. They don't even have Sid Haig. Come on, show, do better. The train and the gang collide, and holy crap, the Bannermans have a Gatling gun. Sheesh. Hayes and the kid fire into the air to warn the gang off. It works, and they turn around and retreat, but 2 of the men are killed. Hayes and the kid ride back to the train, throwing themselves at Harry's mercy. Also, there's another synchronized move when they both hop back up onto the train car. Very cute. They do take off their hats in respect as the agents load the 2 dead bodies on board, but that's the only bit of regret we're going to see from them. Harry questions them in the baggage car. Even though the agents failed at their mission, they still want to get wasted, but Harry's like, no booze for you guys. The guys start to try and lie their way out of the situation with Harry, but before they get very far, Sarah interrupts them. She takes a look at the bodies and claims that one of them is the body of Kid Curry. Harry is delighted by this, and now they can break out the whiskey. Even Harry takes a big swig. He's feeling much more forgiving of the boys now. Hayes continues with his story, but now he tells them that Sarah is lying and they know that the dead man isn't Kid Curry. He says he knows this because they spent time with the Devil's Hole gang, and they lay it on pretty thick with how great Hayes and Curry are. Harry doesn't believe them, but they can prove it because they know who the dead man actually is. Henry Maxwell Jenkins, and they can prove it by the ring he wears. So they do know this guy that died, and they don't seem all that broken up about it. I guess as long as Wheat's okay, it's all good, or I don't know, maybe they just didn't like this particular fellow. Now Harry does believe them. Hayes and the kid butter him up, telling him they'll make him a hero in exchange for $500. After all, they should make some sort of profit off of this, right? They figured out Daly and Sarah's plan. Their plan was for Daly and Sarah's gang to rob the gold from the train while all the Bannerman agents were trashed after killing the Devil's Hole gang. It's kind of convoluted if you ask me. Harry gets Daly into the baggage car to question him. Hayes pretends to have been an undercover agent this whole time and quickly gets him to admit that there's going to be a second attack by a second gang. They tie up Daly and Sarah and prepare for said attack. Daly and Sarah watch from the windows, and considering there's about to be a lot of gunplay, I might have ducked myself, personally. So this gang gets closer, and the agents are armed and ready, and smash cut to Harry paying the boys $500. Yep, we didn't get to see the fight. Lame. What, did they run over budget this episode? The last thing Harry asks of them is a more accurate description of Hayes and Curry, so our heroes proceed to just make up stuff to throw them off the trail, which, yeah, not a bad idea. Our heroes ride off into the sunset, and Harry is pleased as punch to have his accurate descriptions, with Hayes having a huge scar under his chin, and Curry being skinny as a rail. Truthfully, I think the last episode was better, which is kind of the opposite of how I felt my first time watching this show. Harry's a fun character, but he does have a tendency to grate on my nerves. We do kind of know the Devil's Hole gang, so I guess the stakes were a bit high, but since none of the actors from the pilot came back, it's hard to even make yourself believe that this is the same group. There's a bit more action here, but they ripped us off by not showing that final fight. Maybe I just rewatched the action episodes more than any others, so my perception is skewed. Maybe there really isn't that much action in the series. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but at least last week there was a mystery. I mean, this week, true, we didn't exactly know what Daly and Sarah were up to, but we did know that they were the villains and they were going to double-cross the Bannerman agency. It's not bad. The scene between Hayes and the kid where they argue whether or not they should save the gang was great. I love that the kid, the gunfighter, is the one arguing to save lives here, and Hayes has to be talked into it. The line of the episode has to go to Harry, even though I just said he can get on my nerves sometimes. But when he's questioning them in the baggage car, he asks what their real names are. He says, just so we have something to write on the tombstone. And I think this episode goes to the kid for the reasons I have already stated. Next time on Alias Smith and Jones, the boys get hired to transport $50,000 and spend almost the entire episode split up. Also, the skipper is there. Research for this podcast comes mainly from the wonderful book Alias Smith and Jones, the story of two pretty good bad men by Sandra K. Sagala and Joanne M. Bagwell. Thanks for listening.